reading more about today is our failure to finally approve the Keystone XL pipeline. This really is a no-brainer. Canada is going to be using this oil no matter what. So the question is, do you want to route that to the United States, which would create tens of thousands of jobs? Do you want us to be able to get energy from a country that's an ally of ours, so we don't have to get as much from the Middle East? Or are we going to say, oh no, we don't want anything to do with that, at which point Canada will simply sell it to China? So if you have environmental concerns, those are totally irrelevant at this point, because that oil is going to be used one way or another. So to me, I think it's a no-brainer that we take advantage of that as part of a larger strategy to wean ourselves away from Middle Eastern oil. It's good for the economy and it's good for national security. So we need to move on that as soon as possible. Second, I co-sponsored the bill to audit the Federal Reserve. I think that the Fed has really gained a lot of power. It's not accountable to the people. It's one thing to try to maintain a stable currency, but when you become an economic central planner, when you're bailing out financial institutions, I think in a representative republic, we have a right to know what's gone on, and so I think that bill will pass the House. I hope it'll pass the Senate this Congress. I also signed on to a bill to end pensions for members of Congress. I don't think politicians should be getting taxpayer-funded pensions, and to kind of lead by example on that, I went ahead and I declined my congressional health benefits. Casey and I do our own health care that's more expensive for us and is less generous, but I don't think it's fair that members of Congress have better health care than the people they represent. Informed the personnel office that I was going to disclaim my congressional pension benefits. They still make me pay into it, but I told them that I do not want to accept those benefits. I think that having pensions causes people to stay longer than they should and prevents them from actually going out and making their way in the world. So that was a promise that I made when I ran, and it's a promise that I kept. I would go around and talk to people. One of the things I advocated, and a lot of it was from feedback from people who told me, wait a minute, people go up to Congress and they just follow whatever rules they want or not do. They do what they want. There's no consequences. And so I thought about that as I got that feedback, and the one thing that stuck into my mind was the U.S. Senate not having passed the budget in 4 years. Now you're required to do this by law, so it's not like this is just something we're pulling out of thin air. It's a requirement, and yet it's just something that hasn't been done, and there's been no consequences. And so to me, that's bad. I mean, if you have a country dedicated to the rule of law, if you violate the law, there should be something that happens, because if you decided to simply disregard some laws in your life, you would face consequences. So one of the things I advocated during the campaign was the idea of no budget, no pay. If you don't pass a budget as you're required to by law, then you're not going to get paid until you actually do pass a budget. And we actually did this just to start, just for this year, but in January we passed a bill that said both chambers of Congress have to pass a budget by the deadline, April 15th. And if you don't pass a budget, so if the Senate doesn't pass a budget on April 15th, their pay is going to get withheld until they decide to actually pass a budget. Now, I think that needs to be made permanent, but it's a very good first step to try to bring some accountability to Congress. That's something that I said I would do, and it's something that I think more and more people, and we got 80 Democrats to join with us in that, so people across the political spectrum, I think, understand that you must be accountable for your actions when you go up to Washington, D.C. And then finally, on Friday, I could say that I passed a piece of legislation out of the House. The president at the end of 2012 issued an executive order to provide automatic pay increases for the vice president, the cabinet, members of Congress, and non-military federal employees. I didn't think that that made sense given our fiscal situation, so all my bill basically did was maintain a pay freeze through the rest of the year. That's something that both Republicans and Democrats have advocated in the past, and it passed the House. We got 40-50 Democrats to join with us in that. So if I don't do anything else, I can at least say I passed the bill on that. And with that, I will simply open it up for whatever your thoughts, concerns, comments, questions. Let her rip. Sir.
Two questions, Ron. Do you expect that extending the no pay for no budget will extend to the executive branch as well as the legislative?
Well, what we did on that was we passed the Require a Plan Act. It didn't do the pay, and the only reason it is because the Constitution says that the president's pay can be neither increased nor diminished during his term in office. So if we changed it, it would only be for the next president. So that's the problem, is that you have a constant, because they didn't want the Congress to just reduce other branches' pay. It's fine for us to reduce our pay, I think, and there's a 27th Amendment that says you have to have an election intervening. I think that's only for pay increases for services rendered. If you're not providing honest services, I think you can cut your own pay, but it's a constitutional issue when you talk about the president.
And my second question is, Travis Hudson has established an office in Palm Coast. Are you going to follow suit?
What we're going to do in Palm Coast, we have full offices in St. Augustine and in Port Orange. And basically the way the district is, those are kind of two central locations where everyone can get to in about 30 minutes. And I haven't committed to opening up any offices for the simple reason that, we're having big budget cuts in the House because of sequestration. So I don't know how much money that I'm going to actually have, and what I want to make sure that I'm doing is not deficit spending. I mean, it's one thing for me to go up there and complain about us spending too much money, and if I'm not somebody who can do that in my own office, then that's a problem. So we're being conservative with how we're going to do. At a minimum, what we'll do is like Congressman Micah did and have somebody here, one morning a week. And, we're still in the process of filling out our staff. We got most of them done, but the way this works is, they don't actually give you any money to hire anyone until you actually get sworn in. So when I got sworn in, I didn't have a full staff. We had to kind of hire a lot of people from there. So we're working on it, and what I've tried to do is come down here as much as I can. I've been down here a number of times and continue to do that. Sir.
How about working on something that to make a time limit for these people to be in office instead of being in it for 40, 50 years?
Well, that's music to my ears. So he's basically asking, he said, what about term limits for members of Congress? And I think you do, and I've kind of thought about how do you actually, because it's one thing to say term limits, but you need a constitutional amendment, which is 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, then 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. If you get it through the House, the states would ratify it in a second, because all those state legislators, they want to go to Congress someday, so if they term limit the people who are there, that's more spots open for them. So I'm confident it'll get ratified, but you just have to get it out of Congress. So what I've been thinking about is, okay, we can try to say a certain number of terms and do that, but that hasn't succeeded in the past, and what I think we may need to do is basically just say, states should have the ability to limit their representatives as they see fit. So if Florida wants to enact term limits for its congressmen and senators, it can. If Massachusetts doesn't want to, that's fine. Now some people say, oh, well then Massachusetts can have all the seniority. Well, you know what? We need to start changing this idea of seniority. It should be based on your merit and what you bring to the table, not how long you've hibernated in office. Yes, we have. There's actually cards right here, and it should have all that information on it. Sir.
Assuming sequestration passes on March 1, or goes into effect on March 1, then what?
So the question is about sequestration, and so this is a mechanism, this is kind of Washington speak for There was a big budget deal, debt ceiling deal in 2011 in August, and what they did was they said, okay, well, we're going to create a super committee. They're going to come up with reductions, and if not, you're going to have sequestration, which automatically goes into effect, which will basically kind of do almost, not really across the board. It's big spending cuts to mainly defense and some other things. And so it's something that people thought would not happen. The problem is they haven't done anything to avert it, and so I absolutely think it will happen because there's no plausible plan that's been put forth right now to try to avert it. I know the House had passed a couple plans last year before I got here, but I've been up there for 45 days and I haven't seen anything. And so the question is, what are you going to do from there? I think one thing we can do is not necessarily spend more, but just say, okay, because part of the problem is the cuts are based on appropriations from the past and different language. So the military, they may have one account that has no money, another account that has it, and they have no freedom to kind of move that money around. So I think at a minimum, we can give them the freedom to do that so they can prioritize the mission critical items. And then if there's some other things that may not be as necessary, maybe they don't have to worry about that as per. So that, for sure we can do that, I think, but in terms of like there being a grand deal to avert it, I just don't see it. A guy like me coming in, the president's basically saying, you need to be willing to raise taxes to avert this, and so you can understand how I'm viewing this. I didn't support the Budget Control Act. I wasn't there. I thought it was a dumb idea. So he's the one who signed his name onto it. Republicans and Democrats in the Congress voted on it. So here I come in and they're telling me, oh yeah, in order to save us from the policy years we've made, you got to come in and start raising taxes. Well, that's a non-starter for me. Not only because that's not what I pledged to do, but two, the tax increases he already received, Congress has already spent it. You're supposed to raise about $60 billion, they said, a year. Congress has already, in supplemental spending, done that with no offsetting cuts or anything. And so what that showed me is that you can talk about raising taxes as part of a balanced approach for deficit reduction. The problem is Congress doesn't reduce the deficit with it. They spend more once they have tax increases. So, sir. Well, is it in terms of like cyber spying or just normal traditional spying? I mean, I think that, yes, so there's a lot of discussion about cyber threats and how we need to combat that. But there's also different proposals which have raised concerns as well for freedom and individual privacy and whatnot. So, we need to make sure that we can deal with these hostile threats, and cyber threats are every bit as worrisome in a modern age as traditional threats. But we also need to not be clumsy about it and do it in a way that's going to erode people's freedoms. I haven't actually seen legislation yet, although there is some I know people have worked on, but it's definitely something that people are talking about, and I've heard it for sure. Sir?
Yeah, Ryan, I'd like to hear a little bit more about with up in Congress as far as the three questions, whatever that is. All they keep talking about, all you ever hear from Obama is, if you don't pass a budget, there goes your Social Security and all your entitlements. These are not entitlements to these people, nor myself. We paid into it all our lives. This is money that belongs to us. Nowhere is anybody talking about taking away the money that we give to the asparagus growers. Nobody is talking about that $1 a gallon that's going as a subsidy to the oil companies for every gallon of biodiesel we ship outside the United States. Nobody's bringing these things up. They won't cut them.
Actually, we tried to cut. I don't know about asparagus. We tried to cut some agriculture subsidies because when they were doing the disaster supplemental spending bill, now that had a lot of things that had nothing to do with disaster relief. It's typical pork barrel politics, but guys like me were saying, okay, there's a need for some of this stuff. Let's try to reduce spending. We tried to cut the remaining bank bailout funds. We tried to reduce some agriculture stuff. We tried to do that, and Congress doesn't want to do it. So it's not that people aren't talking about it. There are people that are talking about it. It's just there's not, and so that's why when you see sequester and things like that, it's not smarter to cut across the board, because there's certain things that are vital, like national defense. There are certain things like a lot of these green energy